Hi, fellow teachers. Happy New Year 2021. In this short video, I'm going to share with you some ideas on how to use tasks to promote communication and engage students in the language classroom. Let's get started. As teachers, you must have heard of task-based language teaching. But what is a task? How do we create tasks? How do we make them more engaging to our students? So let's have a look at some examples from ALICE 2013. As you can see on the slide here, the students have to look at Mary's shopping list on the left, and then they need to look at the list of items in Abdullah's store on the right, and then they work with a partner, and one person is Mary, and the other person is Mr. Abdullah. And then they can make a conversation following a structure. Now let's have a look at another example, also from ALICE 2013. Students now work in pairs as student A and student B. Student A has a shopping list, and they have to talk with student B so that they can put ticks next to the items that they can buy. Student B is the shop owner, and they have to talk with student A so that they can write out the items that they don't have in stock. Alice argues that the first example is not a task because students just have to go through one item at a time, and there's no real reason to communicate. The second example is now a task because there's a reason for student A and student B to communicate now, and there's an information gap that they need to fill. And the second example meets different criteria of a task. Now I would like to explain the different criteria of a task according to ALICE 2009. By the way, Alice was my doctoral supervisor when I was doing my doctorate in TESOL, and my dissertation was on task engagement. I like these criteria because they are quite specific. So these are the four criteria. First, there has to be a primary focus on meaning. There should be a communication gap among the participants. The participants need to use their own resources rather than rehearsing linguistic items, and there needs to be a communicative outcome. So let me explain these criteria a little bit more. First, a focus on meaning. What this means is that tasks should be designed to allow learners to communicate ideas or understand meaning when they listen or when they read something, rather than rehearse language. So for example, when students memorize a word, or when students memorize a rule, or when students fill in the blanks with words provided, that is more language rehearsal rather than a focus on meaning. Next, there should be a communicative gap, and what this means is that a communicative gap provides reason for learners to use language communicatively in the classroom. And this gap can be an information gap. Maybe learners have different information and they need to share it with one another. There may be an opinion gap. They may have different opinions, and now they have to negotiate and they have to share their opinions. There may be an inference gap. When they read something or they listen to something, their understanding may be different. So this is considered an inference gap. The third criterion is that learners need to use their own resources, linguistic resources, as well as non-linguistic resources to achieve the communicative outcome. And by doing this, they access their own resources and restructure their resources. And through this process, language development may occur. Finally, there needs to be a communicative outcome. This means that there has to be an objective beyond the use of language for its own sake. For example, in the second activity that I just presented, students have to find out the items that they cannot buy or they have to find out the items that they don't have in stock. So that is an objective beyond the use of language for its own sake. And these 4 criteria are all important for an activity to be considered a task rather than an exercise. Okay, so there are only 4 criteria, but for some reason, when I recite the criteria, it's difficult to remember all of them. So I'm gonna stop here for a second to see if you can remember the 4 criteria that I just presented. So what types of tasks are there? Actually, there are many different ways of categorizing and describing tasks, and this is just one of them. And this may give you an idea of what tasks you can use and how you can sequence them in your language classroom. Description tasks, basically what it means is that learners need to identify a reference, right? An item. An instruction task means they have to explain procedures. In a narration task, they have to relate a sequence of events. It's like storytelling. And in an opinion task, they need to express and support a position. When you think about these tasks, you can think about what kind of language is produced, when and how do we use these types of tasks in the classroom so that you can make the decisions of when and where to use them. This is an example of a description task. Here, students work in pairs, and one student is the speaker, the other one is the listener. And the speaker has to describe a hat, and the listener has to identify what hat is being described. This is another example of a description task. I actually used it when I taught small children virtually. We were learning the 12 animals in the Vietnamese zodiac. And then I asked the students to work in pairs. One student had to choose an animal to describe to the other student, and the other student had to guess what was being described. And I was really happy to see some creative language used here, even when the students' level was pretty basic. This is an example of an instruction task. It is more like a mathematical problem. And the students have to work in pairs to solve the problem. And after they solve the problem, they can explain it to the rest of the class to see if other students can follow their solution. And in my classroom, I have used some mathematical problems like this. And it's always engaging because students are really interested in solving the problems. This is an example of a narrative task. Again, students work in pairs. One student has to order the pictures to make an original story of their own. And then they have to tell the story to their partner, and the partner has to order the picture. So again, you can see that there is a reason for the students to communicate here, and the listener really has to listen in order to order the picture. So there's also a communicative outcome. There's an outcome beyond just practicing language. There are many types of opinion tasks, and you may be familiar with all of these. Students may be asked to debate a controversial topic. They may be asked to choose what items to keep if they are stranded on a boat and they cannot keep all of them. They may have to make decisions based on an ethical dilemma, like what patient to give an organ to, or they may have to decide what courses to include in a curriculum, what items to include in a shop, or what activities they want to propose to their university to organize. And these tasks push students to express their opinions and defend their positions. So I hope that this framework of categorizing tasks may give you more ideas on what tasks to use in your classroom to promote more communication. I mentioned that I have done research on task engagement and I have had a few publications on the topic. So if you're interested in reading these articles, please feel free to email me or request them on ResearchGate. The main question here is what tasks are more engaging to students and what tasks may encourage better engagement. And engagement is understood in a multidimensional sense here. It has to do with behavioral engagement, cognitive engagement, emotional engagement, and social engagement. The research that I have conducted so far focuses on the effect of choice on engagement. Of course, there are many different factors that may be important to engagement, but based on the research that I have done, these are some simple principles that you may keep in mind. You can think about whether the tasks allow learners to think about and communicate their own ideas, whether the task creates a genuine need to communicate. In my situation, the tasks that were engaging were the ones that engaged students from different backgrounds who had different opinions and who could share different cultures. Those tasks were really engaging to my students. You can also think about whether the topics are familiar and personally relevant to the learners. So these are actually very simple criteria, but you can keep them in mind as you choose tasks for the students. Another way that helps you to meet these criteria is to allow the students to develop the tasks themselves or the task materials themselves. So for example, when I taught in China in one of the workshops that I was invited to teach, the task that generated a lot of communication was the one where students were asked to draw their own pictures and created their own stories and then told the stories to their partner. And again, the partner had to also order the pictures. And so that's one way for you to maximize learner engagement. I hope that the presentation is clear and makes sense. I encourage you to try maybe one or two ideas to see if you like them. And I'm happy to share more teaching ideas like this. So if you like the video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you want to hear more from me, please subscribe below. Thank you.